The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling plains of Apache territory. The air was dry but carried the earthy scent of the nearby river, a reminder of life and sustenance in the harsh wilderness. Layla, a young Apache woman known for her keen mind and gentle heart, moved carefully along the riverbank. She had been sent by her family to gather herbs, remedies for wounds, fevers, and the small ailments that life inevitably brought. Her basket, woven with care, swayed lightly against her hip as she knelt to examine a patch of chamomile nestled among the tall grass. The peaceful scene, however, was deceiving. Unbeknownst to Layla, danger lurked nearby. A rival tribe, embittered by old conflicts and jealous of her people's prosperity, had been tracking her movements. Shadows shifted between the trees as men armed with bows and knives crept closer, their intentions dark and unforgiving. Layla's instincts told her something was amiss. Her ears picked up the faint snap of twigs, the hurried rustle of leaves, but before she could react, the attackers sprang from the brush. Fear seized her chest, a cold hand gripping her heart. She dropped her basket and stumbled backward, only to be cornered against a rocky outcrop. Her cries, raw and urgent, pierced the quiet of the afternoon. She tried to fend them off, using her small stature and agility to dodge their first attempts. But she was unarmed, defenseless, and quickly overwhelmed. Just as despair began to creep into her mind, a figure appeared from the edge of the forest, a man moving with the silent precision of a predator and the confidence of one born to the land. His presence seemed to command the very air around him. This was Tay, a respected Apache warrior known for his courage, sharp instincts, and unwavering loyalty to his people. His eyes, dark and steady, took in the scene in an instant. Without hesitation, he drew his bow and released an arrow that struck one of the attackers with precision. Another assailant lunged at him, and Tay met him with a fluid motion, a swift kick followed by the clash of a knife against his blade. The fight was fierce but brief. Tay's years of training and intimate knowledge of the terrain gave him the upper hand. One by one, the attackers were driven back into the shadows from which they came, leaving the clearing eerily silent except for the ragged breathing of its survivors. Layla, trembling and wide-eyed, watched from behind a boulder. She had never seen such skill, such calm in the face of danger. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly powerless and yet inexplicably safe. Tay approached her cautiously, aware that she might view him with suspicion. He knelt to check her for injuries, his hands gentle yet firm. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the authority of someone who had seen far too much suffering yet remained unshaken. Layla nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Her gratitude was immediate, though tempered by the instinctual caution that had kept her alive. Despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she could not help noticing the subtle strength in him, the way his muscles moved beneath his tunic, the careful, precise manner in which he handled his weapons, the intensity in his eyes that seemed to see more than just the present danger. She felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, a mixture of relief, awe, and curiosity. Tay helped her to her feet, offering support as they moved to a safer spot further from the riverbank. She followed, still wary, but sensing that this man, this warrior, was different from the others she had encountered. He had not just saved her life, he had entered it in a way that demanded her attention, awakening emotions she had long kept hidden. In that moment, neither of them knew the depth to which this encounter would shape their futures, but something unspoken had shifted, a spark, fragile yet undeniable, that would grow with time. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Layla realized that her world had irrevocably changed. She had survived the ambush thanks to Tay, but she had also glimpsed something far more dangerous than the rival tribe, the stirrings of a connection that could consume her heart entirely. After the chaos of the ambush, Tay knew that Layla needed more than just protection. She needed care. Her wounds, though not life-threatening, were serious enough to require attention beyond what she could manage alone. Tay led her to his hidden cabin, a modest structure nestled deep within the forest, shielded by towering pines and the winding river that ran nearby. It was a place few knew existed, a sanctuary where he sought solitude and reflected on his life as a warrior. Yet now it would also become a place of healing for someone else. The cabin was simple but functional. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Tay moved with practiced ease, gathering water from a nearby spring and preparing clean cloths to tend to her injuries. Layla watched quietly, still wary but grateful. She had been rescued from death only hours before, and though her heart pounded with residual fear, she felt a tentative sense of safety under Tay's vigilant presence. "Sit," Tay instructed gently, guiding her to a low bench near the fire. "We need to clean these cuts." Layla obeyed, her hands trembling as she extended her arm. Tay worked efficiently, washing away blood and dirt with warm water and carefully dressing each wound. He spoke sparingly, his words measured and calm, a soothing presence against the trauma she had just endured. He noticed the smallest details, the way her hand flinched at pain, the tension in her shoulders, the quiet breath she tried to hide. Every motion he made was deliberate, designed to minimize discomfort, and she could not help but feel a deep admiration for his skill and patience. As the hours passed, Layla began to relax, allowing herself to trust the warrior who had saved her. She spoke hesitantly at first, sharing stories of her childhood and her life within the tribe. She told him about her family, the traditions she cherished, and the small joys that filled her days. Tay listened, rarely interrupting, though he occasionally asked questions that drew out more details, more glimpses of the woman behind the fear. In turn, he shared fragments of his own life. He spoke of battles fought and lost, of nights spent alone under the stars, and of the responsibilities that came with being a protector of his people. Though he remained guarded, there was an honesty in his words, a quiet vulnerability that Layla could sense but not yet name. By evening, the cabin was filled with the soft glow of the fire, the silence between them comfortable rather than tense. Tay brought out a small bowl of broth, encouraging Layla to eat. She accepted, recognizing that nourishment was essential for recovery, though she found herself more aware of his presence than the food before her. There was something grounding about him, a steady strength, a quiet confidence, and a sense of safety she had not experienced before. As night fell, Layla curled under a blanket near the fire, still weak but steadily regaining her strength. Tay remained nearby, his eyes alert to every sound outside the cabin. Though he had saved her body from harm, he was beginning to realize that protecting her heart might be a far more delicate endeavor. Every glance, every careful word seemed to carry more weight than he anticipated. He found himself watching her, studying the way her hair fell across her face, the small gestures of grace in her movements, and the courage that lingered in her eyes despite the fear she had faced. For Layla, the experience was transformative. She had come to the cabin broken, frightened, and wary of the world beyond her tribe. Now she felt a flicker of something she had never allowed herself to feel fully. Hope. Hope that she could recover, not just physically but emotionally. Hope that there were people like Tay, who could be trusted, who could offer protection without demanding anything in return. By the end of the night, both understood silently that their bond had begun to deepen. Tay had saved her life, but in doing so, he had unknowingly opened a door to something neither of them could yet name. In the quiet of the forest, with the fire crackling softly and the world outside held at bay, Layla began to heal, and Tay's heart, though guarded, began to stir in ways he would soon find impossible to ignore. By the time Layla's wounds had fully begun to heal, days had passed since the ambush, and the rhythm of life in Tay's cabin had settled into a quiet, almost domestic routine. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls, painting the floor with golden streaks, and the sounds of the forest, birds calling, leaves rustling, provided a gentle backdrop. Layla moved with more ease now, her steps no longer tentative, her body no longer weighed down by pain. And yet, as much as her physical injuries were mending, it was the subtle, unspoken shift between her and Tay that marked the most profound change. At first, their interactions were purely practical. Tay taught her how to gather herbs safely, how to recognize edible plants versus those that were poisonous, and how to move silently through the forest without drawing attention. Layla, quick to learn and attentive to his instructions, proved capable beyond what he had expected. Each day she grew more confident, and each evening Tay watched her with a quiet pride that surprised even him. There was an elegance in her resilience, a determination that set her apart from many he had known. They began to share small moments that had nothing to do with survival. While cooking over the fire, Layla would hum soft melodies from her childhood. Tay, who rarely allowed himself the luxury of leisure, found himself listening more intently than he intended. Sometimes they would sit by the riverbank, skipping stones or simply letting the water flow past their feet in companionable silence. Words were often unnecessary. The understanding between them grew in gestures, glances, and the ease of being in each other's presence. Layla, who had always been cautious of men after the ambush, found herself slowly letting down her defenses. She noticed the way Tay's eyes softened when he looked at her, the small protective gestures he made without thinking. He never imposed himself, never demanded attention, but she felt it all the same. In the quiet of the cabin, she began to trust not only his strength but his character. And as trust grew, so did curiosity. A curiosity about who he was, what drove him, and why his gaze seemed to linger on her for just a moment too long. Tay, for his part, had never allowed himself to care so deeply for anyone outside his family or tribe. He had known camaraderie among warriors, respect among elders, but this was different. There was a warmth in Layla's presence that seeped into the edges of his guarded heart. Her laughter, light and unrestrained, filled the spaces he had long kept empty. Her courage, even in the face of past trauma, drew admiration he could not easily conceal. Each time she smiled at him or shared a story from her life, he felt a pull he neither expected nor understood fully. Their bond deepened further as Layla began to participate in tasks that had once been Tay's alone. She learned to set traps, to track small animals, and to recognize the signs of danger in the forest. In teaching her, Tay found himself revealing pieces of his own past, lessons learned from hard experience, mistakes he wished he could have avoided, and values he held sacred. Layla listened, asked questions, and sometimes challenged him, forcing him to articulate thoughts he had long kept internal. In these moments they were equals, partners navigating a world of constant risk and wonder. Yet underlying all these practical lessons and shared moments was an unspoken tension, a quiet acknowledgement that their connection had begun to transcend friendship. Both noticed it in small ways, a lingering look, a subtle touch, a warmth in the chest when the other was near. Neither spoke of it, both fearing that words might disrupt the fragile balance of trust and comfort they had built. And yet the feeling was undeniable. They were drawing closer, bound not only by circumstance but by a burgeoning affection that neither could ignore. As evening fell and the sky blazed with amber and violet hues, they would often sit together by the fire, letting the silence speak for them. Layla found herself studying Tay's face, noticing details she had never paid attention to before. The curve of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, the way he moved with both strength and precision. Tay, in turn, found his thoughts lingering on her long after she had gone to rest, replaying her laughter, her words, and the simple grace with which she navigated the world. In those quiet days, a bond had formed stronger than mere survival could create. Tay had saved her life, yes, but in her presence he began to feel something far more powerful stirring within himself. The slow, inevitable pull of love. And for Layla, the walls she had built around her heart were beginning to crumble, little by little revealing a desire to trust, to lean, and perhaps to love as well. The forest that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed fraught with tension. Tay had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the wilderness, the whisper of the wind, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, but the warning signs were unmistakable. Tracks had been spotted near the riverbank where Layla had been ambushed days before. Broken branches, footprints pressed into the soft earth, and the faint scent of strangers carried on the wind signaled that danger had returned. Layla noticed his change in demeanor before he spoke. Tay's eyes, usually calm and watchful, darted more frequently to the shadows. His movements, precise and purposeful, carried a new urgency. He scanned the tree line, listening for the faintest hint of a footfall that did not belong to the forest. For the first time since she had arrived at his cabin, Layla felt the familiar surge of fear creep back into her chest. Though she had grown stronger, the memory of the ambush was still fresh, a shadow lingering over her newfound sense of security. "We cannot stay," Tay said quietly that evening, his voice carrying the weight of a man accustomed to making life or death decisions. "They have tracked you. If we remain in this cabin, they will find us." Layla's heart sank. She had come to cherish the quiet rhythm of the cabin, the moments spent by the fire and the warmth of Tay's presence. The thought of leaving this safety filled her with anxiety, but she recognized the truth in his words. Tay's eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers. In them she saw not only concern for her physical safety, but also a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. Together they began preparations to move. Tay packed only what was necessary: water, food, weapons, and supplies for the journey. Layla helped where she could, carrying herbs, securing blankets, and learning to tie knots and fasten pouches like a seasoned traveler. The act of working side by side brought them closer, their movements synchronized by necessity and growing trust. Though danger loomed, there was an unspoken understanding. They would face it together. As night fell, Tay led Layla through the forest along hidden trails known only to him. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silvery patterns on the forest floor. Each step required careful attention. The snap of a twig could betray their presence, the flash of movement could signal an approaching enemy. Layla's heart pounded not only from the fear of pursuit, but also from the closeness of Tay. His hand brushed hers occasionally, intentionally or not, sending warmth through her chest that she could not ignore. During brief pauses, Tay would speak softly, teaching her how to move silently, how to read the terrain, and how to anticipate threats. His words were calm, authoritative, yet tinged with an intimacy that made Layla's pulse quicken. She listened intently, hanging on every instruction, not just for survival, but because she valued his guidance, his presence, and the subtle ways he demonstrated care. The forest grew denser, shadows longer, and the distant sounds of the rival tribe reached them at times. A faint rustling, the sharp bark of a command, the clash of metal. Tay's grip on his weapon tightened, but he never let fear control him. Instead, he exuded confidence and strength, silently reassuring Layla that she was protected. In the way he moved, in the steadiness of his gaze, she realized that her trust in him had evolved into something deeper, an emotional reliance that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. At one particularly tense moment, they found themselves crossing a narrow river on a fallen log. Layla's foot slipped, and without thinking, Tay caught her by the waist, steadying her with firm hands. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to shrink around them. She saw not only the warrior who had saved her life, but also the man whose presence stirred feelings she could not yet name. Tay, usually composed, allowed a fleeting softness to appear in his expression before focusing again on their path. By dawn, they had put distance between themselves and the ambushers, finding a secluded clearing surrounded by high ridges. Exhausted yet alive, they settled briefly, gathering strength for the next leg of their journey. Both were aware that the threat was not gone, only delayed, and that the trials ahead would test more than their survival skills. They would test the fragile trust and growing bond between them. In the quiet moments before sleep, Layla reflected on the journey so far. Tay had not only saved her life once, but had guided her through fear, danger, and uncertainty. She realized that her feelings for him had deepened beyond gratitude. He was no longer just a protector. He had become someone whose presence she could not imagine living without. And for Tay, the danger had revealed something he had not expected. Layla's courage, her intelligence, and her resilience had stirred a deep affection within him, a feeling he could neither name nor resist. As the first light of dawn touched the fore, the journey through the wild began before dawn with a chill that bit through even the thickest hides. Mist hung low over the forest, veiling the trees in a silvery haze, and every sound felt magnified in the stillness. Layla walked close behind Tay, her steps lighter than they had been days ago. Fear no longer guided her movements, now it was focus, trust, and the quiet strength she drew from the man leading her through the unknown. Tay moved with purpose, reading the land as if it were a language only he understood. Every broken branch, every shift of the wind carried meaning to him. He would pause occasionally, kneeling to study the ground, then motion for her to follow in silence. His instincts were unerring. He knew which paths to avoid, where to find water, and when to rest. To Layla, he seemed almost a part of the earth itself, an extension of its wisdom and power. They traveled through dense forests and across rocky ridges where the air grew thin and sharp. Sometimes they spoke little, conserving energy and staying alert. Other times they shared quiet conversation, small stories, fragments of memory that wove a growing intimacy between them. Layla found herself asking about his childhood, his first hunt, the lessons his father had taught him. Tay, though often reserved, answered her questions with honesty. His voice, deep and calm, carried an ease that made the vast wilderness feel almost safe. In return, Layla spoke of her family, her late mother's songs, and the herbs she had learned to use for healing. Her voice, soft but sure, brought warmth to the cold nights they spent beside the fire. Sometimes she would sing in her native tongue, melodies that rose and fell like the wind through the canyons. Tay would listen, his gaze fixed on the flames but his thoughts anchored on her. The song stirred something in him that words could not express, a longing he had long buried beneath years of solitude and duty. As the days stretched on, they began to move as one. When Tay stopped, she stopped. When he gestured to crouch, she mirrored his movements. Her awareness sharpened, her instincts growing keener under his guidance. He taught her to track animals by their prints, to tell time by the sun's shadow, and to listen to the silence as carefully as to the noise. At first, her attempts were clumsy, but she was quick to learn. Every time she succeeded, spotting a hidden trail or identifying an edible plant, Tay's approving nod sent warmth through her chest. But the wild was unforgiving. Storms swept through the valleys with sudden fury, forcing them to seek shelter under rocky outcroppings or beneath thick canopies. Once, while crossing a swollen river, the current nearly pulled Layla under. Tay dove in without hesitation, catching her arm just before she was swept away. They emerged on the opposite bank, drenched and breathless. In that moment, Layla clung to him, trembling not from cold but from the realization of how close she had come to losing him, or herself. Tay wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his voice low and steady. "You're safe," he said, though the words carried more than reassurance. They held a tenderness that spoke of something deeper, something neither of them dared to name. Layla looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his, and for the first time she did not look away. That night, as they sat by the fire drying their clothes, the distance between them seemed to vanish. Layla rested her head against his shoulder, and Tay did not move. The crackling flames illuminated their faces, softening the lines of worry and fatigue. The world outside, the danger, the uncertainty, faded into the background. In its place was a fragile peace, an unspoken connection that neither could ignore any longer. By the 5th day of travel, the bond between them had transformed. What began as protector and protected had become something deeper: partnership, trust, and quiet devotion. Layla no longer saw Tay as just a warrior. She saw the man beneath the scars, the one who carried loneliness behind his calm eyes. And Tay, despite his attempts to suppress his emotions, knew the truth that had been growing within him. He had not only saved her life, he had found the one thing he did not know he was missing. As they stood atop a high ridge overlooking the vast valley below, the setting sun painted the sky in crimson and gold. Layla turned to him, her face framed by the fading light, and for a fleeting moment Tay allowed himself to feel the full weight of what his heart already knew. Somewhere between the river and the ridges, between fear and firelight, the wild had taken two wandering souls and bound them in a way neither would ever forget. By the time they reached the edge of the high plains, the wilderness had tested them in every way, through hunger, exhaustion, storms, and near encounters with their pursuers. But on that particular night, the world seemed to pause. The sky stretched endless and clear above them, blanketed in a sea of stars. The moon hung low and luminous, silvering the landscape with a quiet, haunting beauty. The danger that had followed them seemed, for a moment, far away. Tay chose to make camp near a small lake whose surface reflected the night sky like glass. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sage and pine. He built a modest fire, its orange glow a soft counterpoint to the cold blue of moonlight. Layla helped, her movement steady and practiced now. She no longer needed instruction. She had become his equal in survival, though he still watched her with a protective gaze that betrayed how deeply he cared. Once the fire was lit, they sat across from each other, the silence between them filled with the quiet murmur of the lake and the whisper of the wind. Layla studied Tay's face, illuminated by the flickering flames. The lines of weariness around his eyes, the faint scars that marked his cheek, and the stoic calm that seemed to anchor him. All of it stirred something deep inside her. She wanted to know more than his strength. She wanted to know his pain, his fears, the man behind the warrior. "Tay," she said softly, her voice barely carrying across the fire, "why do you live alone out here?" For a long moment he didn't answer, His gaze remained fixed on the flames as if searching for words in their dance. Finally he spoke, his tone low and steady. I have seen too much war. Too many faces lost to it. The land teaches silence. It does not betray you like people sometimes do. Lila's heart tightened. There was sorrow in his voice, the kind that came from deep wounds, not of the body but of the soul. She leaned closer. And yet you still came for me. You still fought to save a stranger. He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers in the firelight. You cried for help, he said simply. I could not ignore it. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. Many would have. Tay shook his head. Not the man my father raised. They sat in silence again, the fire crackling softly. The air between them was heavy, not with tension but with emotion unspoken. Layla's heart beat fast. For days she had felt the shift between them, the glances, the subtle touches, the unspoken care. Now under the vastness of the night sky it felt impossible to ignore. She reached across the small fire, her fingers brushing his wrist. The contact was brief but electric. You carry pain, Tay, she said softly. But there is more in you than sorrow. He hesitated, then turned his hand, allowing her fingers to rest in his. His skin was rough, calloused from years of battle, yet his touch was gentle, careful as though he feared breaking something fragile. There is, he admitted quietly, but I have buried it for so long I no longer know what to do with it. Layla's voice was a whisper now. Maybe it isn't meant to stay buried. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing the faint tremor in his jaw. Tay was not a man easily undone, but Layla's words seemed to pierce through the armor he had worn for years. You have changed something in me, he confessed finally, his voice raw with truth. When I found you by the river, I thought I was saving your life. But somewhere along this path, I began to feel as if you were saving mine. Layla's breath caught, her eyes locked on his, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind his strength. Slowly she rose and crossed the space between them. The firelight painted her in gold and shadow as she knelt beside him. I feel it too, she said softly, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I didn't ask for it, but it's here. For a moment neither spoke. The night held its breath. Then Tay lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles, a gesture of reverence more than desire. Under the vast moonlight, their silence said what words could not. Two souls bound by circumstance and drawn together by something neither could explain, finally acknowledged what had been growing between them. That night, neither of them slept much. They talked in whispers until the fire burned low about their pasts, their fears, their hopes. Two hearts learning to trust in a world that had given them little reason to. And when dawn finally broke over the horizon, the bond between them was no longer fragile. It was something real, something that could no longer be denied. The sun rose quietly over the mountains, painting the horizon with hues of crimson and gold. It should have been a peaceful morning, the kind that promised safety, a new beginning after the storms of the past. But for Tay and Layla, dawn brought unease. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that only came before danger. The birds had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Tay's instincts flared first. He froze as he bent to tie the horse's reins, his gaze darting toward the ridge above the lake. We're not alone, he murmured. His hand went to the knife at his belt, then to the rifle propped against a tree. Layla's heart began to hammer. She didn't need to ask how he knew. She had learned by now to trust his senses as sharp as a wolf's. Who is it? She whispered. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. Not soldiers. These are trackers, hired men perhaps. He motioned for her to move behind the rocks near the lakeshore. Stay down. No sound. But it was already too late. A rifle cracked in the distance and a bullet tore through the air, striking the dirt near their feet. Layla gasped, instinctively ducking as Tay pulled her down behind a fallen log. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the morning sky. Dust rose behind their horses as they began their descent. They've found us, Tay muttered, jaw tight. He loaded his rifle with steady hands, eyes locked on the approaching figures. Layla clutched his arm. You can't fight them all, Tay. He turned to her, and for a brief moment the fire in his gaze softened. I won't let them take you. Whatever happens, you run south. Follow the water until you reach the canyon. I'll find you. She shook her head fiercely, tears threatening to spill. No, not again. I'm not leaving you." Before he could argue, another shot rang out, splintering the tree beside them. The time for words was over. Tay rose from cover and fired once, twice, clean, precise shots that sent one of the riders tumbling from his saddle. The others scattered, seeking higher ground. Layla stayed low, watching in terrified awe as Tay moved like a ghost between trees, his every motion purposeful, fluid, deadly. The attackers regrouped, shouting orders in English and Spanish. They were bounty hunters, men who cared little for law and even less for mercy. Layla recognized one of them, Colonel Sutter's enforcer, the man who had dragged her father from their home before everything fell apart. Rage burned hot in her chest. "Layla, no," Ty called as she stood suddenly, but she had already picked up his revolver from the ground. Her hands trembled, but her aim did not. The gun fired with a deafening crack. The enforcer's horse reared and threw him, his weapon flying into the dust. Tay's eyes widened in shock and fierce pride. She had fought, not as a victim but as a warrior beside him. But their victory was short-lived. The third rider circled wide, taking aim from the ridge. Before Tay could react, the bullet found its mark, a sharp, searing strike to his shoulder. He stumbled, the rifle slipping from his grasp. "Tay!" Layla screamed, rushing to him. She caught him before he fell completely, her arms wrapping around his broad frame. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark against his bronzed skin. "I'm fine," he gritted out, though his face was pale. "It's nothing." "Nothing?" she cried, pressing a cloth to the wound. "You've been shot." He tried to smile, though the pain etched deep lines around his eyes. "You're safe. That's all that matters." The last of the attackers fled, not out of mercy, but because they knew reinforcements would soon arrive from town. The echo of gunfire faded, replaced by the harsh rhythm of Tay's breathing. Layla tore a strip from her skirt, binding his wound with trembling hands. "Don't you dare close your eyes," she whispered fiercely. "You saved me once, now let me save you." His gaze met hers, heavy with both pain and tenderness. "You already have," he murmured. She didn't understand at first. Then she saw it, the faint smile, the quiet surrender in his eyes. Tay, the warrior who had lived through war and loss, was finally allowing himself to be cared for. The fight had tested more than his strength. It had tested their bond, their trust, their love, as she helped him back to camp, supporting his weight against her shoulder. Layla realized something vital. She no longer saw herself as the woman who needed rescuing. She was his equal, his partner. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. And though blood stained the earth that morning, something new was born in its place, a love tempered in fire and bound by survival. The storm that night rolled in without warning, dark clouds sweeping over the desert, lightning flashing across the horizon like the anger of ancient spirits. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of rain and blood. Layla half-dragged, half-carried Tay through the growing downpour, her heart pounding with every step. "Tay, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking over the rumble of thunder. His head sagged against her shoulder, his breath shallow and ragged. The wound in his shoulder had reopened, and the blood soaked through the bandages she had tied in haste. They stumbled upon a shallow cave near the canyon wall, barely more than an opening in the rock, but it offered shelter from the storm. Inside, the air was cold and damp, echoing with the steady drip of rainwater. Layla eased him down gently, her trembling hands brushing the sweat from his brow. "Tay," she whispered again, her voice shaking. "Look at me." His eyelids fluttered open. Even in pain, there was strength in his gaze, that same unyielding calm she had come to depend on. "You did well," he murmured. "You fought like one of us." "Don't talk," she said quickly, pressing her hand to his chest to keep him still. "Save your strength, please." She tore the rest of her skirt into strips, cleaned the wound as best she could, and bound it tightly. Her hands were slick with his blood, but she didn't stop. Each time his breath hitched, her heart seized in fear. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, tears cutting clean tracks down her dirt-streaked cheeks. Outside, the rain poured in sheets, the wind howling like a lament. "You once told me the land teaches silence," she said softly. "But I can't be silent now." Tay's eyes opened again, faintly amused through the pain. "You never were." Despite everything, she smiled. "And you love that about me." A shadow of a grin touched his lips. "Maybe I do." Then his expression softened and his gaze drifted toward the cave's entrance. where the lightning illuminated the world in flashes of white. "Layla," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "If I don't make it, no." She shook her head fiercely. "Don't say that, you must listen," he insisted weakly. "If I fall, go to the White Rock Village by sunrise. Tell them you're under my name. They'll protect you. Promise me." Tears blurred her vision. "You're not dying, Tay. I won't let you." His breath came slower now, his eyes half-lidded. "You're strong, Layla, stronger than you know." "Then let me prove it," she whispered, gripping his hand tightly. She stayed awake the entire night, feeding the small fire she had built from scraps of driftwood, whispering words of comfort even when he couldn't respond. At one point he stirred, delirious from fever, speaking in his native tongue. Words she didn't understand but felt in her bones. He was calling out to someone. His father, perhaps. The ancestors. Layla leaned close, brushing his damp hair from his face. "You're not leaving me," she said quietly. "Not now. Not after everything." The storm raged outside, but inside the cave time stood still. Layla hummed softly, an old lullaby her mother had sung when she was a child. The melody filled the darkness, wrapping around them like a fragile promise. When dawn finally broke, the rain had stopped. The desert was quiet again, washed clean by the storm. Layla blinked against the pale light and turned toward Tay. He was still. Too still. Her heart stopped. She pressed a hand to his chest, and for one agonizing moment felt nothing. "No," she gasped, shaking him. "Tay, no!" Her tears fell freely now, splashing against his skin. "You can't leave me like this," she whispered brokenly. "You said you wouldn't." Then faintly, almost imperceptibly, she felt it. A heartbeat, weak but there. She choked out a laugh of disbelief, half sob, half prayer. "That's it." "That's right. You hold on, warrior." She redressed the wound, made him drink what little water she had, and held him close as the warmth of the sun began to reach the mouth of the cave. His breathing steadied, slow but alive. When his eyes finally opened, he found her looking at him, tired, tear-stained, and utterly radiant with relief. "You wouldn't stop talking," he rasped faintly. "Hard to die with that noise." Layla let out a breathless laugh, wiping her eyes. "Then I'll never stop talking again." He smiled weakly. "Good." And in that fragile light of morning, with the storm behind them and life restored, Layla realized that something inside her had changed forever. She was no longer the one who needed saving. She had fought death itself, and won. After the storm, the world seemed renewed, washed clean by rain and sunlight. Yet for Tay and Layla, there was no time to linger. The threat of the rival tribe still lingered, though weakened by the recent skirmish. Their journey had taught them resilience, endurance, and the depth of trust they shared. Now the time had come to return to the tribe, to a place of relative safety, but also a place that carried the weight of expectation, tradition, and scrutiny. The ride back was slow. Tay, still weak from his wound, leaned heavily on Layla, who guided their horse with a steady hand. Their journey through the forest and across the ridges was quieter this time. No ambush, no sudden dangers, but the tension remained. Both were aware of the eyes that would soon watch them. Layla had always been careful, measured, and cautious around her people. Tay had always been the solitary warrior, respected but distant. Together they were an anomaly. When the outskirts of the tribe's settlement finally came into view, Layla's heart beat faster. The familiar structures, the scent of cooking fires, the sound of children laughing. It should have been comforting. Instead, a sense of unease settled over her. She knew that appearances mattered here, and that both her survival and Tay's presence would be judged carefully. As they entered the main clearing, the people of the tribe froze. The whispers began immediately. Tay, with her? Did he find her alone? How? Curiosity, surprise, and skepticism mingled in the air. Tay dismounted first, helping Layla off the horse. His presence was commanding. Even weakened, he carried the aura of a protector, a man who had faced death and returned. He did not rush, did not bow or plead for acceptance. He simply stood by Layla, letting her speak for herself. She straightened, gathering courage. "I owe my life to Tay," she said loudly so that all could hear. "He saved me from those who sought to harm me. I am alive because of him, and I trust him with my life." The elders regarded her silently. Respect in this tribe was earned, and Layla had just earned it in the most compelling way imaginable. by surviving and standing before them to declare her choice. Tay did not need to speak. The people saw the scar on his shoulder, the signs of struggle on his body, the unwavering protection he had offered. They understood. He had proven his worth not with words but with action. Still, some skeptics murmured, questioning why a man so feared and respected would risk everything for a woman. Layla stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "He is my choice," she said firmly. "Not for honor, not for status, but because he has shown me what it means to be truly protected and to be truly trusted." The air seemed to shift. Whispers softened into nods of acknowledgement. Even the elders, stern and cautious, could not deny the bond that had been forged in fire, in danger, and in the wilderness. They could see it in the way Tay watched her, in the quiet attention he gave her every gesture, in the way he moved with her as if anticipating her every need. As the sun climbed higher, the people of the tribe began to accept what they could not argue with, that two souls, bound by extraordinary circumstances, had found each other. Tay had not merely saved Layla's life. He had earned a place within the hearts of those who mattered most to her, and Layla had proven herself brave, resilient, and wise enough to make her own choice. Later, when the settlement had quieted and the day waned into evening, Tay and Layla found a quiet spot near the river that ran through the village. They sat together, hands intertwined, hearts still racing from the trials they had faced. The journey back had tested more than their endurance. It had tested their trust, their courage, and their willingness to face the judgments of others. Tay turned to Layla, his eyes soft with gratitude and something more profound. "You have given me more than life," he said. "You've given me your heart." Layla smiled, her own heart full. "And you've given me yours. I never thought anyone could protect me so completely, in every way." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat quietly together, knowing that the bond between them was unbreakable. They had returned to the tribe not just as survivor and protector, but as equals, partners, and the beginning of something far greater. A love forged in fire, strengthened by trust, and bound by the courage to face the world together. The days following their return to the tribe were filled with a mixture of relief, quiet celebration, and reflection. The elders had accepted Tay and Layla, albeit with careful observation, and life had begun to resume a rhythm in the settlement. Yet for both of them, the most important journey was internal, the navigation of feelings they had nurtured amid danger, blood, and survival. Morning broke with a brilliance that seemed to celebrate them. The sky was painted in fiery gold and crimson, mirroring the intensity of their experiences and the bond they had forged. Layla rose early, slipping out of the small dwelling she shared with her family, and made her way toward the river where Tay often practiced his tracking and hunting techniques. Her heart quickened at the thought of seeing him, not out of fear or uncertainty but out of longing. Tay was already there, kneeling by the river bank, sharpening his knife. The muscles of his arms flexed with each movement, his body lithe and strong, a testament to years of training and survival. When he looked up and saw her, a faint smile broke across his face. It was the first smile she had seen without shadows of worry or battle behind it. "You're here," he said softly, sheathing the blade. "I am," Layla replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought I'd join you before the sun climbed too high." Tay stood, approaching her with a quiet confidence that made her pulse quicken. He stopped just short of her, his eyes scanning her face, memorizing the contours that had haunted his dreams since the ambush, the curve of her cheek, the strength in her jaw, the fire in her eyes that matched his own. "I owe you everything," he said finally, his voice low and sincere. "I was meant to protect you, but somewhere along the way you saved me instead. You brought life back into a heart I thought had long been hardened." Layla's breath caught. "Tay, I never imagined I could feel this way. Not after everything. And yet here I am knowing I cannot imagine life without you." He reached for her hand, enveloping it in his large, calloused palm. The contrast of his rough exterior and the tenderness in his grip made her heart swell. "Then let us not imagine it," he murmured. "Let us make it real." They moved closer until there was no space between them, their foreheads touching in a gesture of quiet intimacy. The river murmured beside them, The forest whispered above them, and the mountains stood as witnesses to the unspoken vows forming in that moment. "I promise," Tay said, "to stand by you, in peace and in battle, in joy and in hardship, to protect you, not just with strength but with all of me." Layla's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And I promise to stand with you, to trust you, to love you, with every part of my heart that you have already claimed." He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as if he never intended to let go. The world narrowed to that single moment, a timeless bubble where past fears, past dangers, and past pain fell away, leaving only the two of them connected by courage, trust, and undeniable love. When they finally parted, it was to see the tribe watching quietly from a distance. Children peeking from behind trees, elders nodding in approval, families smiling. There was a collective acknowledgement of what had been forged, a union not only of hearts but of respect, resilience, and shared survival. The sun rose higher, casting light over the river and the forest beyond. Tay lifted Layla's chin and their eyes met once more, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever trials might come in the future, they would face them together. Nothing could unbind what had been welded in fire, fear, and trust. And as they walked hand in hand toward the heart of the settlement, the wind carried a gentle whisper through the trees, as if nature itself celebrated the love that had grown in the shadows of danger. Tay and Layla had survived battles, ambushes, and storms, and now, having faced the ultimate tests of both life and heart, they had discovered a love as enduring and fierce as the land around them, unyielding, eternal, and entirely their own. For the first time in their lives, they were not merely survivors. They were whole together.